Hello, everybody. I'm Roberto Adriani from Italy, and today I would like to talk to you about corporate reputation in the era of fake news, and more specifically about threats, trends, and techniques to protect brands. The first question we can ask is why fake news spreads so fast? Fake news is a complex phenomenon involving both psychological and technological aspects. The psychological mechanism behind this can be summarized as follows. First of all, people don't actually read the content they are sharing. People don't consider the legitimacy of specific news sources. People are vulnerable to confirmation bias. And people infer legitimacy from related content in some ways. People see a piece of content as more legitimate the more they see of it. And also, people confuse satire and hoax. Also, seems that fake news spreads faster than the truth. Authors found that falsehood diffused significantly farther, faster, deeper, and more broadly than truth in all categories of information on Twitter. We have also to take into consideration that some new technologies can make false news more believable, thus circulating even faster. These new technologies are pushing us into a new era of fake news, so-called deep fake. Now, let's see the threat of fake news to corporate reputation. While corporate reputation is becoming more and more important, fake news has begun to be a serious threat to this asset. Fake news can smear corporate reputation and even create financial turmoil, the ideal background for speculation. According to the 2021 ICCO report, crisis counseling is the skill that has increased most during the pandemic, as expected. A relevant example is that of Starbucks when, in 2017, tweets advertising Dreamer Day, in which the coffee chain would supposedly give out free frappuccinos to undocumented immigrants in the US, spread at lightning speed online. Starbucks was near to fall victim to a boycott campaign. Another example of fake news is the story of the supposed American ownership of Barilla, one of the most iconic Italian brands. The company replied very clearly, specifying that Barilla was founded in 1877 and indeed sold in 1971, but it had been bought back by the Barilla family in 1979. There is also the case of fake news involving an entire industry instead of a single brand. This is what has happened to the pharmaceutical industry on a massive scale with misinformation about COVID vaccination and the pandemic in general. According to literature as well as PR practice, the most common practices adopted by companies to protect their reputation from fake news are developing crisis communications plan. A crisis communication plan is basically a protocol that explains in detail how to manage communication when a crisis arises. Setting and starting media monitoring in order to be ready to handle a possible crisis sparked by fake news. The first thing to do is to organize a systematic monitoring system of what is being said about your brand. Also, setting up, in advance of course, the crisis communication team. The crisis communication team has the task of analyzing the situation, evaluating various options, deciding which to implement, and evaluating the results. Engaging potential allies. When a brand is marred by fake news, having an ally is important as the company can amplify its voice and arguments. These potential allies are stakeholders who know and trust the company. Communicating with employees. When leaders communicate with urgency, transparency, and empathy, it helps people adjust to the constantly changing conditions brought by a crisis. A tone of urgency encourages employees to make quick decisions to mitigate harm. Not only top management, but also large scale of other people should receive training tailored to their specific role and tasks. For instance, notifying receptionists and other employees who might get media inquiries. So the conclusions can be, first of all, the analysis shows that companies, at least the larger ones, are aware of and generally quite prepared to handle possible fake news against their brands. Also, thanks to an increasingly effective use of the technologies, especially for monitoring and analysis available today. However, when these attacks are directed against the entire industry rather than specific companies, the ability to respond effectively seems to diminish. This is the case, for instance, with the pharmaceutical industry. It was already the subject of conspiracy theories before the pandemic, but it's literally exploded during the COVID-19 crisis. However, it's important for companies in this sector to learn to have a dialogue with those who express doubts and fears, explaining and reassuring them. Because if it is not done, then conspiracy theories will always manage to offer the best answer to these doubts and fears. Thank you. Thank you for your attention. And now I'm, of course, available to answer your questions.